June 6, 1944, English Channel, 5:30 a.m. Gray waves crash against steel hulls as the largest amphibious invasion in history nears its moment of truth. The wind howls, tearing at the canvas screens surrounding strange machines perched on the edges of landing craft. Inside each Sherman tank, crews wait in silence, engines rumbling beneath the roar of the sea. A signal flare arcs upward, hatches seal shut, propellers churn the black water. The first tanks slip into the waves and disappear. Some rise again, bobbing awkwardly, fighting the tide. Others vanish beneath the surface, dragging their crews down with them, swallowed by the cold and the chaos. Ahead lies Nazi-occupied France, a coastline fortified with mines, bunkers, and artillery zeroed in on every approach. Yet this desperate gamble of steel and flotation will determine whether thousands of infantry on those landing craft behind them live or die, because these are not ordinary Shermans. They are amphibious tanks. And the man who made them possible was an engineer few outside military circles had ever heard of, Nicholas Straussler.
In 1942, the Allies learned a devastating lesson on the rocky beaches of Dieppe. When tanks tried to land directly on the shoreline, most never even reached the seawall. They bogged down in shingle, trapped under machine gun fire, with no armor support to silence German defenses. Nearly 60% of the assault force were killed, wounded, or captured in just a few hours. The conclusion was undeniable. Infantry cannot take a fortified beach alone. Tanks must land early, first if possible, to break open the defenses. But in the coming assault planned for northern France, the Germans knew this too. They had built the Atlantic Wall, 2,400 miles of bunkers, steel obstacles, anti-tank guns, and artillery nests designed to annihilate any landing force before it could secure a foothold. To succeed, armor needed to arrive before the enemy could respond. Only one problem stood between planners and victory. Dense underwater minefields and obstacles prevented landing craft from reaching the sand safely. If tanks rode the boats in, they would be destroyed before their ramps opened. The Allies needed armored firepower that could float, move under its own power, and reach shore with infantry. An idea that to many seemed absurd. Yet the British military had already been searching for an inventor capable of turning a 33-ton tank into a seagoing vessel, a machine that could swim ashore, fold down its flotation screen, and immediately fight. But few engineers possessed both the imagination and the audacity to attempt such a thing. Fewer still had the technical skill to actually succeed. That search ultimately led to a Hungarian-born automotive designer working quietly in Britain, a man whose inventions had already caught military attention, Nicholas Straussler.
Nicholas Straussler had spent his early career in Budapest and later Britain, driven by a fascination with machines that could operate where others failed, on rough ground, in swamps, even across water. He had designed armored cars, novel suspension systems, and experimental amphibious vehicles long before the world realized how desperately such ideas would be needed. By 1941, Straussler was already on the radar of the British War Office. His early experiments involved flotation screens, collapsible waterproof walls made of treated canvas held upright by compressed air. Deployed around a vehicle, they created a sealed chamber of air large enough to keep tons of steel afloat. He reinforced the concept with buoyant pillars and a flexible skirt, ensuring stability in waves. But flotation alone solved only half the challenge. A floating tank needed motion, real propulsion. Straussler added dual propellers powered by the tank's engine, connected through a newly developed drive system. With a turn of a lever, tracks disengaged and propellers spun to life. Suddenly, a 33-ton Sherman tank could move through water at roughly 4 to 5 knots. Trials revealed problems. Screens ripped, engines flooded, and crews felt like they were sitting inside a metal coffin. But for every setback, Straussler adjusted designs, reinforced supports, and demanded more testing. His innovation soon earned a name, Duplex Drive, shortened to DD, simultaneous use of tracks and propellers. British commanders recognized the potential. After Dieppe, the urgency was absolute. The U.S. Army joined the program, and the M4 Sherman became the platform of choice. Hundreds of tanks were modified, crews trained in secrecy along the British coast. To protect the operation's security, soldiers jokingly called them Donald Ducks. But beneath the humor was the grim understanding that if this invention failed under combat conditions, infantry would be left to charge fortified beaches alone. By early 1944, these strange amphibious Shermans stood ready, and Straussler's idea, considered madness only years before, had become a central element of Operation Neptune, the landing phase of D-Day. The fate of the invasion now depended not just on generals and admirals, but on canvas, propellers, and the courage of tank crews willing to ride a machine never before tested in fire.
For the Allied High Command, the Duplex Drive Sherman was not a novelty. It was a solution to a deadly equation: how to place armor on a beach that artillery could reach, but landing craft could not. Planners like Lieutenant General Omar Bradley and General Sir Miles Dempsey saw the DD as a force multiplier that could save thousands of lives in the first critical hour of the landings. To them, this invention was a strategic miracle. But for the men inside the tank, the reality looked very different. Sherman crews trained for months in the cold waters off Britain, fighting tides, wind, and waves that routinely threatened to capsize their machines. When sealed inside a floating DD, visibility shrank to a narrow periscope slit. Every sound reverberated through the steel hull. The air became hot and stale. If the screen tore or a wave breached the rim, the tank would sink within seconds. Escape was nearly impossible. Many crews whispered the same fear. If we go down with the tank. Yet they trained relentlessly, inflating the screen in under 15 minutes, firing propellers, navigating surf, and once grounded on sand, dropping the screen instantly so the Sherman could fight at full strength. Meanwhile, German commanders, including Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, fortified beaches expecting the Allies to come directly at them, but they did not expect swimming tanks. Their defenses were calibrated to destroy landing craft, not armored vehicles arriving from the sea on their own. This advantage, however, depended entirely on conditions the Allies could not control: wind, current, wave height. Technology would meet weather, and weather would not negotiate. As D-Day approached, planning teams argued, launch DDs farther out, where they could avoid German guns but risk drowning, or closer in, where they risked being blasted before screens could drop. These were not theoretical debates. They were decisions measured in human lives. The engineers, the commanders, and the tank crews all viewed the same machines, yet each saw a different fate waiting inside those canvas walls. Testing continued, performance improved, confidence rose. But secrecy was absolute. Few outside the landing units even knew these tanks existed. And when the invasion plan was finalized, the Duplex Drive became essential to its success, especially on beaches like Omaha, where infantry faced some of the heaviest fortifications in France. The countdown had begun.
The Duplex Drive Sherman was the same machine on every beach, but it was not used the same way. British commanders planned to launch their DDs close to shore, inside the protective range of naval gunfire. They believed the greatest threat was enemy artillery, not the sea. In training, British crews practiced repeatedly in rough waters and pushed their machines to the edge of the screen's limits. American commanders, however, faced a different set of intelligence reports. Omaha Beach's defenses were formidable. and planners feared landing craft would be obliterated long before they reached the sand. To protect the tanks from German guns, the U.S. 741st and 743rd Tank Battalions were ordered to launch farther from shore, up to 5,000, 6,000 yards out, depending on conditions. Some officers objected. The weather looked unstable. Winds were rising. Swells grew higher than safe testing conditions. But the invasion timetable left no room for delay. Among tank crews, confidence mixed uneasily with private doubt. They trusted their machines. They had to. Yet they knew the limits. When waves exceeded 3 to 4 feet, screens could collapse inward, flooding the hull. The cold channel waters would fill the tank within a minute. Still, crews clung to the purpose behind the risk, to give infantry a fighting chance. For them, the DD was not a bold technological leap. It was a shield, the only shield, for the thousands of soldiers who would soon charge through surf and machine gun crossfire. Meanwhile, German defenders maintained constant surveillance of the coast. They saw no armor, no tanks, no landing craft close in. Their attention stayed fixed on the horizon, searching for the first wave. They did not expect a fleet of armored vehicles to rise from the sea itself. Behind every element of this coming storm stood a layer of faith. Engineers trusted mathematics. Commanders trusted strategy. Crews trusted the sea to spare them. And at the center of it all, Nicholas Straussler's invention, tested but unproven in the one environment training could never simulate: combat. The engines were warm. The crews were ready.
The success of the invasion and the fate of thousands would soon depend on what happened next. Sword Beach, eastern flank of the invasion. The launch order was given just before 0700. The sea rolled violently, but British commanders judged the distance manageable, roughly 2,000 to 3,000 yards from shore. Engines roared, propellers churned. One after another, DD Sherman splashed into the water. They pitched and dipped in the swells, but most remained afloat. Periscopes scanned the gray haze ahead. Crews felt the tension ease slightly. The worst fear, immediate sinking, had not come true. As they advanced, the German strongpoints opened fire, but now armor led the assault. Once the Shermans grounded on the sandbars beneath the waves, screens dropped with a hiss of escaping air. Tracks bit into the earth, and suddenly the tanks burst forward, barrels hot, firing at bunkers shielding German machine gun nests. Infantry arriving behind them found gaps punched through walls of steel and concrete, gaps soldiers could run through instead of dying in front of. Further west at Juno Beach, Canadian tank crews faced heavier currents and artillery strikes. Some DDs were hit even before shedding their screens. Others landed slightly off course, but 21 out of 29 tanks reached shore, enough to suppress fire and enable rapid breakthroughs inland. Their steel footprints carved the path for the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, who pushed more than 10 miles inland, the deepest penetration of any Allied beachhead on D-Day. At Gold Beach, too, the British DDs made a decisive difference. They destroyed gun pits, neutralized the coastal batteries around La Hamel, and kept advancing under fire, giving engineers space to clear obstacles and open more landing lanes. Throughout the morning assaults, German reports identified a new threat they had not prepared for. Swimming tanks appeared suddenly at close range. Their artillery struggled to react fast enough. Their coastal machine guns were overwhelmed by armored retaliation. Because of the DD Shermans, 3 of the 5 Allied landing zones, Sword, Juno, and Gold, punched through German defenses faster than expected. Thousands of infantrymen who should have died on the beaches instead lived to fight inland. Amid the chaos of war, one reality became clear. Straussler's invention worked, but as the British and Canadians pushed forward with armor at their side, another beach, farther west, was collapsing into disaster. The seas were rougher there, visibility was lower, the launch points farther out, and the consequences would be catastrophic.
Omaha Beach, 6:30 a.m. Rising wind whipped the surf into white-crested waves.
Swells reached 6 feet, double the safe limit for flotation screens. Inside their steel hulls, the crews of the 741st Tank Battalion waited for a decision that would determine whether they lived or drowned. The launch command came. Men exchanged anxious glances. The order could not be questioned. One by one, 29 American DD Shermans rolled off their landing craft, more than 5,000 yards from shore. The first tank hit the water nose first. It dipped. The canvas billowed. Then the sea surged over the rim. The Sherman disappeared, taking every man inside with it. Another followed, and another. Some stayed afloat briefly, only to founder in deeper water. Engines sputtered. Screens tore. Propellers gasped uselessly in churning waves. Crewmen inside hammered desperately at escape hatches, but within 60 seconds, most tanks went to the bottom, their crews trapped by pressure and flooding. Of the 29 tanks launched by the 741st, 27 sank before reaching shallow water. Only 2 made it to the beach. When the assault infantry of the 1st and 29th Divisions leapt into the surf, they found themselves without the armored support they had been promised. German MG-42s opened fire, carving through the first wave. Mortars exploded among the obstacles. Bodies floated in burning oil slicks. U.S. commanders watching from offshore realized the severity instantly. The entire landing was at risk of collapsing. The order was given to bring the remaining reserve DDs, still on landing craft, straight onto the sand, screens up or not. These Shermans slammed into the beach under concentrated fire. Crews dropped ramps fast, driving directly into the kill zones to draw fire away from pinned infantry. Amid smoke, confusion and loss, scattered tanks that survived, including the 2 that swam, became mobile shields. They blasted open firing slits in concrete bunkers, neutralized anti-tank guns sighted to sweep the beach, and helped infantry scale the bluffs above Dog Green and Easy Red sectors. There, on the most heavily defended shore of D-Day, a handful of amphibious tanks, scattered and delayed, helped turn a massacre into a foothold. But the cost was immense. Dozens of DD crewmen never escaped their steel coffins. Waves buried them beneath the invasion fleet. No monuments marked their graves. The sea keeps them still. The Duplex Drive had proven capable, but only within the narrow envelope Straussler designed. Controlled launches, manageable seas, proper distance. Omaha's tragedy exposed the line between ingenuity and catastrophe. And behind the struggle on every beach stood the same question: was the risk worth it?
When the smoke lifted over Normandy's beaches, the Duplex Drive Sherman stood as one of the most paradoxical creations of the war. On sword, Juno, and gold, success was undeniable. At those beaches, roughly 80% of DD tanks reached shore and fought effectively. Infantry casualties in the first hour were significantly lower than pre-invasion predictions, a direct result of armored support arriving early enough to suppress German fire. Crews who survived spoke of seeing fear flicker in enemy positions as tanks emerged from the sea, unexpected and unstoppable. On Juno, Canadian tankers recalled firing at bunkers still pounding the shoreline, giving infantry seconds that meant the difference between life and death. At Sword, armored breakthroughs helped secure Ouistreham and connect with airborne forces holding key bridges inland. British advances gained momentum that would carry them toward Caen. But reports from Omaha struck a different tone, raw, anguished, and sobering. Survivors described watching their comrades vanish beneath waves, unable to help. Some blamed the sea, others blamed distance. A few blamed command decisions that chose risk over caution. Yet even there, where failure seemed overwhelming, the 2 DDs that swam and the remaining Shermans landed directly, played an outsized role in clawing a foothold on one of the most fortified beaches in the world. Military analysts later estimated that without any tank support at Omaha, the entire landing may have stalled.
Infantry would have faced hours longer under machine gun and artillery fire, with casualties potentially doubling or worse. The Duplex Drive program had always been a gamble, a life-saving gamble on one shore, a deadly one on another. Families of crewmen were later told their sons had died in battle, but few knew they spent their final moments trapped underwater inside an invention designed to save others. Still, every commander reviewing D-Day agreed on one fact: without amphibious armor, the chance of establishing 5 successful beachheads on June 6th would have been slim. Canvas screens, propellers, calculated risk, and young men willing to ride them into war. They changed history at a terrible price.
In the years following the war, historians and engineers examined the Duplex Drive program with both admiration and scrutiny. Some pointed to Omaha Beach as proof of its limitations, arguing the tanks should never have launched in seas so rough. Others countered that even failures taught invaluable lessons about amphibious warfare, lessons that would shape future military planning. British accounts tended to highlight the brilliance of Straussler's design, noting the success across 3 beaches and the essential role DD tanks played in securing the flank of the invasion. American reflections were more conflicted. Omaha had scarred memory and assessment alike, yet buried in after-action reports and personal testimonies is recognition for the courage of the crews who believed in the concept enough to stake their lives on it. For Nicholas Straussler, the Duplex Drive was not the final chapter of his inventive career. He continued to develop military vehicles after the war, contributing to engineering fields where versatility and adaptability were paramount. But among all his creations, none carried the weight or the legacy of the canvas-screened Sherman that swam into history. The DD concept influenced post-war amphibious research across NATO. Floating armor ceased to be a fringe idea and became a foundation for marine mechanized assault doctrine. Armed forces began investing in vehicles that could cross rivers, marshes, and coastal barriers, trusting that technology could grant mobility where nature once imposed limits. For many years, the Duplex Drive story received modest attention. Its successes often overshadowed by the drama of infantry assaults, its failures remembered more vividly than its victories. But as historians revisited the details of Operation Neptune, a clearer understanding emerged. The DD Sherman was not an experiment, it was a frontline necessity. And where it worked, it saved thousands. A single engineer's idea, canvas holding back the sea, had reshaped what armies believed possible. The beaches of Normandy became the ultimate test of technological ambition, courage, and the willingness to take a leap of faith in the face of overwhelming danger. The story does not end with victory, but with memory. The recognition that innovation in war is always forged from equal parts hope and risk. The Duplex Drive was both. Now, with the battle won and the cost counted, only one chapter remains: what this invention meant for history and for the men who rowed their steel lifeboats into hell. History is often told through the roar of guns and the clash of armies, but sometimes it turns on the quiet persistence of a single mind, someone who sees possibility where others see impossibility. Nicholas Straussler never stood on the shores of Normandy commanding troops. He did not lead charges up the beach. He was not a name etched into headlines. Yet his work, conceived in workshops and tested in cold British waters, shaped the fate of an entire generation. The DD Sherman embodied the fragile balance of war, technology pushing past its limits, soldiers trusting machines built by strangers, leaders wagering victory on a thin wall of canvas against the sea. For those tanks that reached shore, the invention brought hope, a way forward through fire. For those lost beneath the waves, the price of innovation was written in silence. Today, few visitors walking the sands of Normandy can imagine how strange it must have been, tanks rising from the surf like phantoms. Yet the evidence remains in the freedom secured on those beaches. The DD Shermans were more than modified machines. They were a message that ingenuity and courage together
can change the fate of nations. And so, in the story of D-Day, alongside the airborne drops, the naval bombardments, the infantry charges, stands the legacy of one engineer who believed a tank could swim, who dared to build the impossible, and whose invention helped open the gates of Europe to liberation.